So a lot of cool, interesting things have happened in the last 24 to 36 hours. And some you may already know, but I haven't really talked about it. So let's sit down and have a chat. First off, I finished my finals. And then what did I do? I decided, create a podcast. Why not? Podcasting is something that I've wanted to do for years, and I still remember those early podcast shows that I used to listen to. In fact, I've even talked about this with some of my classmates. A lot of my classmates want to do podcast shows. But one of the things that's always turned me off about it, going into what took me so long to do a podcast, or what turned me off about it, check out my friend's podcast. It's really good. It's called Cottage Podcasts right there. Anyway, one of the challenges of doing a podcast is the cost of equipment. And I don't have to worry about that now. Let me explain. You guys know that I started doing Snapchat Torah lessons in the spring. And then I started doing Instagram 1-minute Torah lessons. I would then take that audio and that video and then repurpose it on YouTube and Facebook and Medium. And sometimes I would edit it. So my Torah lessons following grew. And also, don't let me forget about Tumblr. But many people started watching my Snapchat lessons. So I then decided that I could take the audio from my Instagram Torah lessons and turn that into podcast. And so even though I thought about this for a long time and have done a little bit of research, I then jumped right into the podcast realm. In less than 24 hours, I created my podcast, had about 2 episodes on it, put it on iTunes and every place that I can think of, and 26 people downloaded it. And then I didn't just repurpose content, which I still may repurpose, but I actually started creating new content for this podcast. And then I got the idea to invite other students, rabbinical students, and rabbis to share their Torah on this podcast. The name of the podcast was Torah Lessons in a Minute, but that just sounds too definite. So now it's Minute Lessons from the Torah. Another one of my challenges with podcasting is that longer episodes take a lot of time, and I just don't have a lot of time these days. And a lot of my challenges are problems with Jewish podcasts. They're just too long. I think a lot of people just want to hear themselves talk. It doesn't mean that those long podcasts are bad. Some of them are really good, like my friend's podcast, Cottage Podcast. But I wanted to do something short. One of the things I've also learned over the years about growing a following is consistency and frequency. And if I did a long podcast, I wouldn't be able to have the content that I plan to have. My podcast is Minute Lessons from the Torah. And like a friend of mine, Rabbi Erica, told me the other day, is that they're like little pearls of wisdom that you could hold on to. So that's it for now. Some other things have happened and I will share them with you, but I'm going to get some breakfast and I'll come back later. It's been an interesting morning so far. I had a phone meeting with one of my professors. I'm trying to get some jobs for next year. So I have 2 pulpit interviews in the next few months. So I want to make sure that I'm at the top of my game for those. Now back to some of the exciting things that have happened in the last 24 to 36 hours. The other day I was at my school, met with one of my advisors. After the meeting, I ran into one of my professors. So I was telling her about my podcast adventure and how I was just sort of jumping into it. And she told me to apply for a grant. A grant. It never actually occurred to me to do that because I'm doing this completely on the cheap. So now I'm going to apply for a grant. Yay! So this grant will give me about $2,000 of seed money to do my project. Good. Another thing that happened in the last 24 to 36 hours is that Facebook has granted me verification status. So I'm verified on Facebook. And what you will see on my Facebook professional page is a blue check mark. I know that's green, but that's the best I could do on Snapchat. This is actually really cool because there's been a reason I've been working social media so hard since becoming a rabbinical student. The short reason is that I knew that I was going to graduate rabbinical school in my late 40s. And I didn't want to graduate and struggle to find a job. I mean, don't get me wrong, finding a job was a struggle for anyone. But I learned very early on that I would get asked a series of questions that a lot of other people did not. I know that those are a lot of questions. It doesn't even really begin to cover the amount of questions that I would usually get within the first few seconds of meeting another Jew. I decided I didn't like that. So I wanted to make sure that when people hired me or brought me in for an interview, they would know exactly who I am. And another thing that's actually kind of interesting, what I've learned over the years, is that me being black, Jewish, queer, and a vegan, all those things on their own are fine. But you put them in one little package known as me or somebody else, and people just lose their minds. They can't handle all of those identities. And so this is great. And the number of rabbis verified on Facebook is pretty small, and those rabbis are amazing. And I'm not sure, but I might just be the only rabbi in my movement or denomination that is verified on Facebook. All this because when I started rabbinical school, I was worried that I would not be hired. And I wasn't worried about my skills. I knew that I would develop the skills. It was because when I walked through the door, people would make a lot of assumptions about me before I even had a chance. And as a friend of mine just told me, I now just might be the most famous rabbi, because I'm a student, in our denomination. And now, as I get closer to graduation, which will be in 3 semesters, all that hard work is paid off, and hopefully I can go where I want to go.